Been 12 now. It is the first week of summer, weekend I should say, and at long last that means one thing, the beach or the pool. But before you go, you're going to want to make sure you take the advice of our next guest. It could even save your life. Dr. Christensen, a dermatologist with Yale-New Haven Hospital and an expert on the dangers of the sun and skin cancer. So Dr. Christensen, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Let's start with some 101. What are the dangers? Why is the sun dangerous?
Well, we know that UV rays, which are the damaging rays for the sun, are the #1 cause of skin cancer and also the most preventable cause of skin cancer. And if the threat of getting skin cancer doesn't sway you, we also know that they cause the signs of aging, wrinkles, sunspots, uneven tone and texture. So we really need to be protecting ourselves from the sun when we go outside.
So you don't look good.
And you might get cancer.
And you might get cancer, by the way. So what are some of the most important things to do to protect ourselves?
So the main thing is just to use protection when you go outdoors, and that kind of comes in two forms. One is sunblock or sunscreen, and the other is sun protective clothing, and we can talk about those things in more detail. But when you use a sunblock, you want to make sure it's broad spectrum. The FDA has new regulations about labeling, so you want to look for that broad spectrum.
I did hear about that. Yeah, they're expecting a little bit more, I guess, explicit or just more stringent labeling.
Yeah, and it's also more regulated, so it's easier for consumers to tell. So you want to look for broad spectrum, and you also want to look for an SPF of at least 30. That's the number that's on there. So 30 is what you want.
Now that number, by the way, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically means that if it's a 30, that if you have that stuff on, 30 hours in the sun would affect you about the way 1 hour would without anything on. Is that accurate?
That is the way it's measured, but in practice, the sunblocks only last about 2 hours or so in real life, so they don't really offer much protection beyond 2 hours no matter what the number is. So
even if it's water resistant?
Right, and the water resistance applies for about 1 to 2 hours.
Okay, so we have to reapply.
Right, so that's the other important thing to remember. You have to put it on every 2 to 3 hours.
Especially if you're sweating, because even if you don't go in the water.
Yep, sweating or swimming.
Now let's move over to some of this protective clothing, because you do see people, my mom, for example, always will wear sort of a nice broad-brimmed hat, and you know, she looks great, so.
I would agree with that. So I actually like the sun protective clothing because that way you don't even have to think about worrying about sunscreen in the areas that have it. I have actually a couple photos of what I do when I go to the beach. This is a picture of my daughter and I when we were on vacation. And you can see I've got my hat, my sunglasses, my long sleeve shirt, and then my daughter's got the same thing, kind of covered head to toe. And these things they're water repellent, so we can go in the water. Here's one of my daughter playing in the waves here. And you know, they're synthetic fabrics, they dry off quickly, and you can just be out there without worrying about it. That's why I like it.
Apart from being adorable, she is ready for a safari. It looks like. Fantastic.
That's the idea.
I love the pictures, by the way. So what are some of the best times to go outside? Or maybe we should talk about the worst times to go outside in terms of sun exposure.
Yeah, so the goal is just to be smart and limit your exposure. Yeah. And so what that means is not being out when the sun is the most intense, and that's basically between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So if you are going to go outside, say if you're a golfer, do it in the morning, do it before 10 a.m. or do it after 4.
I see, of course. So those are the most intense times of day in terms of sunshine. Now, sitting in the shade, is that safe? I mean, if I'm protected from the sun, is that all right?
So relatively, it's much safer than being in direct sunlight. There are some circumstances where the reflection of the sun off the sand at the beach or off the water if you're on a boat can even get you if you're in the shade, but being in the shade is going to block out the majority of the harmful UV rays.
All right, so secondhand sunshine could be an issue.
Yes.
I never really thought about that. Or even off snow, because skiers get that.
Yes, although that's more common out in the West, in Colorado and Utah. You know, when we go to Vermont around here, usually it's minus 10 degrees, so you're covered up head to toe anyway.
That's a good point, yeah. And I suppose you're at higher altitude up there, too. Maybe that's an effect, too. Or let's talk about if you might have skin cancer, what should we look for?
So the most important thing that we notice when patients come to us is they notice a sore that won't heal. So if you have a little red bump or a spot that keeps bleeding, if it's still there after about 3 to 4 weeks, you should have it checked out, because that's the biggest sign of skin cancer.
Is it usually painful, or is it something that just happens to show up on the skin?
Often it's not. It grows so slowly that it's really not particularly painful. It's just a little red bump or a brown spot that just doesn't go away or won't heal. So if anything doesn't look right to you, have it checked out. And
asymmetrical, is that what thing we're looking for?
Yeah, so there are these A, B, C, Ds of melanoma. The A is for asymmetrical, so if it's an irregular shape, if it just doesn't look normal, that's the sign. The B is border, C is color, and then D is diameter, bigger than the size of a pencil head eraser.
Great information. Dr. Christensen, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. It's my
Happy
pleasure.
summertime to you.
Same
and
to
safe
you.
summer, of course, to all of us. Tan in a can? I don't know. Maybe yes or no to that, real quick.
Actually, the short answer is yes. Much
Okay,
safer
much
than
safer.
getting out in the sun.
All right, thank you very much. Sam, the timing's pretty good because I think you're going to be giving us plenty of that dangerous beast.
Yeah, you're right.